And we're back at the brand new Thurmont Regional Library, and they're going to give a talk on the history of Camp David here shortly.
My name is Heather Brennan. I'd like to welcome you guys to the Thurmont Regional Library grand opening celebrations. Because it is part of the neighborhood, we thought it would be fun to have a little history of Camp David. And so we invited Mark Hudson from the Frederick County Historical Society to come in and enlighten us all. So if you'll please give Mark a warm welcome, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? There is a microphone, but I'd rather not use it unless I really have to. Let me get this started. While I'm doing that, were any of you in the presentation earlier today about Camp David and the Cozy? Oh, good. So I don't have to correspond my information to theirs. I think they have probably a little bit of a different story to tell. But I wanted to start out by talking just a little bit about the American president in Frederick County. And Frederick County has had a unique relationship with the presidency going back to the very beginning, going back to George Washington. George Washington was first in Frederick County, or one of the earliest times in Frederick County, during the French and Indian War. He was trying to secure a commission with General Braddock, who was getting ready to make his raid on Fort Duquesne. So Washington came here in early May of 1755, and actually the result of it, Washington distinguished himself on Braddock's ill-fated, as it's always said, Fort Duquesne foray. Braddock himself was killed, but Washington distinguished himself for bravery. He visited a number of times as well, visiting his friend Thomas Johnson, who lived near Frederick, and also came through in June of 1791. He was traveling from Mount Vernon up to Philadelphia, and actually, as you may know, the wagon road was one of the best ways to travel, so he stopped in Frederick. Some of the local accounts said that he stopped at the tavern of Colonel Henry Brothers, which was on the corner of Patrick and Court Street, and then was treated to a banquet at Mrs. Kimball's Tavern later that evening. And part of the local folklore, and we've always been trying to find out if this is true. Reportedly, Barbara Fritchie was among the people who served the president, so there's sort of a continuity in our history there as well. And if you travel up Route 194 up towards Woodsboro and on up towards Keymar, you'll also see a marker up there at what was Cookerly's Tavern, and that's where Washington stayed the next night on up the road. Now there are a lot of different occasions when presidents pass through Frederick County on their way to Washington or on their way from Washington, and one of those people was William Henry Harrison. He was our 9th president, served only for 30 days as president, but on his way to be inaugurated, he stopped in Frederick. It was about a day out from Washington. He stayed here on February 5th, 1841, and as the story goes, there was a throng outside who wanted him to come out and deliver a speech, which he did. And if you think that newspapers and media outlets today are biased, share with you a little bit from the Democratic newspaper. Of course, Harrison was a Whig, so the opposing party was the Democrats. And they said, the president-elect arrived here on the evening of the 5th, and the next morning harangued his fellow citizens in reply to a congratulatory speech on the part of his Whig friends. His physical man is stronger than we had supposed, but his intellect, judging from the effort here, is lower than we had ever anticipated. His speech was verbose and pointless and would not have been creditable to a respectable member of the state legislature. We omitted to notice the most sensible declaration of his whole speech, that there were many other men in this country infinitely better qualified for the office of president himself. True, most true. The public will agree with him. So you can see a little bit of media bias there. There's also sort of some local folklore that had gone around saying that it was while he was in Frederick delivering this speech that he caught the cold that eventually was his undoing. Sort of a dubious claim to fame that I guess we could make, but I think that's probably as much as there is there. Another presidential visitor was Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln had come to Frederick in October of 1862 after visiting General McClellan out on the Antietam battlefield. Of course, the Battle of Antietam was in September of 1862, and in the aftermath of the battle, McClellan had been largely inactive, or as Lincoln said, he has a case of the slows. So he went to the battlefild to talk to McClellan, find out if he had any plans to pursue the Confederate Army anytime in the near future. And one of the things, it had been several weeks since the battle, and McClellan said to Lincoln, well, the horses are tired. And Lincoln said, tired from what? And at one point he also asked McClellan, General, if you're not going to use your army, may I borrow it? So you can see Lincoln was rather annoyed with McClellan. So Lincoln's coming back. He visits General Hartsuff, who was a Union general who was recuperating in Frederick. And he went to the B&O depot to catch the train that eventually would take him into Washington. And of course, as always, around Lincoln, a throng gathered, and people were asking him, please do a speech, please do a speech. And Lincoln was very, very resistant to do that. But he finally, and supposedly this is entirely improvisational, but he said, fellow citizens, I see myself surrounded by soldiers and by the citizens of this good city of Frederick, all anxious to hear something from me. Nevertheless, I can only say, as I did elsewhere 5 minutes ago, that it is not proper for me to make speeches in my present position. I return thanks to gallant soldiers for the good service they have rendered and the blood they have so nobly shed for their dear Union of ours. And I also return thanks not only to soldiers, but to the good citizens of Frederick, and to all the good men, women, and children throughout this land for the devotion to this glorious cause.